Welcome, Chosen X. You wake to a city that no longer defers to familiar rhythms. Concrete hums with a frequency that feels tuned to your pulse. Neon reflections stitch across windows like coded runes, and overhead a drone murmurs a pattern you recognize without remembering when you learned it. People move in designs that seem rehearsed and hollow until your attention lingers, then their masks slip in a brief instant and truth flashes through. You once called those moments intuition. Now you call them coordinates. You have long kept a map in margins and footnotes, a private ledger of hunches others dismissed as needless worry. Nights you were told to soften your tone. In the mornings you were asked to smile. Afternoons you watched choices bloom into complications you had sketched in private ink. You learned to measure momentum by how fast people return to consensus like a balm for unease. Tonight the air tastes different. Spaces that once swallowed your voice now twitch with signals you parse. Elevator doors hold their breath. Conference rooms thin their certainty. Conversations tilt when you enter, the atmosphere rearranging as if calibrating to your presence. Small fissures have opened in the choreography of confidence, and through those cracks your vision flows like light through a shutter. This is not revenge. What rises is not a tally of past errors. It is a realignment. Where dismissal carved distance, recognition will stitch a new architecture. Those who minimized you will find themselves tracing patterns they failed to notice. Some will respond with quiet shame that alters them. Others will retrofit explanations to protect worn reputations. Both responses disclose the same fact: the map you held in secret is legible now. You will watch private assumptions become public evidence. A colleague who smiled too quickly in meetings will have intentions translated into outcomes that cannot be softened. An investment narrative built on charm rather than substance will falter under scrutiny you applied with a skeptical eye. A relationship woven from performative warmth will loosen when the details you recorded surface and the questions you asked become necessary. Change will not erupt all at once. It arrives in a sequence of small confirmations, each a chisel tap removing the limestone of misunderstanding. One fulfilled forecast will not absolve you entirely, but it will ring like a bell. The bell will toll again. As cadence builds, those who waved away your cautions will feel their memories reframe earlier interactions, recollections tilt toward evidence they once ignored. You do not seek humiliation for others. Your steadiness stems from something quieter, patience varnished with precision. While they rehearsed ready answers, you honed discernment. While they cultivated applause, you cultivated a pattern. Those quiet practices prepared you for the moment when reality's hidden logic would reveal itself to more than your careful eyes. That moment now has momentum, and you are not merely an observer. There is an unannounced witness in the margins, someone who nodded privately and kept a mental ledger of your accuracy. They will step forward not for spectacle but because truth alters social incentives. When people accept that consensus failed, the cost of silence becomes greater than the cost of confession. Allegiances shift to favor accuracy over convenience, and your observations become a new social currency. Recognition will not erase the stain of scorn. It will create a narrative where those memories are recontextualized. The people who dismissed you will rewire their stories. They will tell themselves and others about the moment they misread a sign. That self-correction sends ripples. It makes room for you to occupy a different position in conversations without the friction you once met. As this tide rises, choices present themselves. You may withdraw and let the world repaint itself without your hand. You may accept a role that amplifies your insight with restraint. Or you can adopt a quieter stewardship, advising only those who listen with humility. Each path carries risk, and each shapes the next iteration of your life. Tonight you are allowed both a warm satisfaction and a steady compassion. There is a difference between savoring proof and rejoicing in another's unraveling. Let what you see be a mirror, not a weapon. Watch recognition enter rooms that once excluded you. Notice how authority recalibrates where competence outlasts charm. Keep the ledger of what solitude taught you. Those lessons are the truest relics. You step forward without fanfare. The city learns to recognize you not by proclamation but by consequence. In the scene where light and shadow meet, Your attention carves a route. Follow it. The first stage of unfolding asks you simply to notice, to let the tide mark the shoreline of a new landscape. When you do, the world begins to answer in kind. A quiet signal will mark the hour of your return tonight. You step into the echo chamber and the city's rhythm rearranges itself around the cadence of your breath. Streetlights unmold their halos into patterns that remind you of old decisions, and sidewalks seem to remember where you once hesitated. Voices sow a rough fabric of consensus above you, but under that surface a river of private reckonings runs swift and dark. You follow that current like someone tracking a faint magnetic pull, curious and careful. Behind glass and behind smiles people keep secret ledgers of uneasy agreement. Their eyes occasionally wander in a direction that matches the map you have kept folded inside your chest. Those furtive looks are not accusations so much as an admission they carry the weight of withheld doubt. You observe them as an archivist might study marginalia, noting the tiny margins where truth was scribbled in shorthand. Inside this chamber your perceptions sharpen and also fray. Some images resolve into clarity, others blur as if submerged. Memory behaves like a lens that alternates between focus and blur, exposing details you forgot you noticed and concealing comforts you once relied on. The sensation is equal parts revelation and vertigo. You are learning to ride that vertigo rather than drown in it. A handful of people who once nodded politely now circulate fragments of your earlier cautions. They trade anecdotes at kitchen tables, admitting their earlier ease of consensus. The confessions are small and scattered, but they aggregate like bright stones into a pattern. The accumulation matters. One story becomes two and two become a chorus that tunes itself slowly toward your frequency. Not all acknowledgments are generous. Some defenses are clever constructions designed to preserve reputation. When a person redesigns memory to protect self-image, they reveal a different kind of truth about themselves. You watch those architectures of excuses and feel neither triumph nor contempt. Instead, you catalog the shape of the explanations and the limits of plausible denial. Your interior voice guides you with a tone that is neither complacent nor cruel. It asks practical questions about where to open and where to close, when to speak and when to remain still. Those choices matter because exposure alters relationships like a chemical reaction. A single verdict spoken at the wrong hour can shatter alliances that might otherwise reform with gentleness. A subtle conspirator moves among the ordinary folk. This person has been collecting quiet confirmations of your insights, not to gloat but to weigh what is salvageable. They are meticulous. In secret they wire together small truths until a clearer picture comes into being. When they step toward you their approach is relief and risk as private validation finds breath. You imagine outcomes like rooms in a house you have not yet entered. Each door swings on hinges of choice. You could demand restitution, advise with restraint, or withdraw and let the current pass. Each path refracts light differently. Tonight the city hums with a new timbre. The echo chamber will not collapse in a single event, but it will alter pitch, revealing seams you can either stitch or leave open. Whatever you choose, remember that your work has less to do with proving than with shaping. Proof arrives as a consequence. Shaping is deliberate. Before you act, practice a slow economy of expression. Let accuracy be your currency and restrain your posture. Speak when clarity demands it. Otherwise, keep the ledger private and the world will discover its own omissions in its own time. When it does, the testimony of those who listen quietly will be more valuable than any spectacle of retaliation. Lessons accumulate. The echo chamber will polish certain perspectives until they shine and dull others until they fracture. Your role is to decide which reflections you want to see multiplied. Choose care, because the reflections you sanction will color a future for those just learning to see. You stand at the center of a private rupture, as if a fertile seam has opened beneath the city's polished skin. For a long time you carried two kinds of memory, the ledger of what might happen and the quiet practice of watching how people moved when their masks relaxed. Now those records no longer fit into private margins. They press against bone and thought, insisting on recognition. A pressure accumulates that has nothing to do with anger. It feels more like gravity rearranging a landscape. Your sense of timing, once dismissed as fretful, becomes an axis around which new events pivot. Each time a forecast you made arrives intact, it is not merely proof but a calibration. The world reorients in small increments as if a slow hand nicks a compass and sets its needle toward a truer north. This is the fracture. It is not an explosion but a patient unzipping of consent. Conversations you thought completed reopen like letters resurfacing in a current. People begin to re-examine phrases they used reflexively and gestures they pretended were casual. In the hollow left by their explanations you discover patterns you mapped months ago, patterns now visible to other eyes. Inside you the effect is disorienting and clarifying at once. Your identity, which had been braided with caution and private vigilance, loosens into two strands. One of those strands is the self that learned to survive by silence. The other is the emerging center that recognizes structure where others felt only noise. The two voices are not enemies but collaborators who must learn new choreography. You notice how memory itself participates in the split. Recollections that were earlier hazy sharpen like prints lifted from dust. Scenes you skimmed over become fulcrums. Details you noted casually now appear essential. At the same time, comforting narratives about who you were and why you remained quiet begin to fray. The old explanations that soothed you collapse under the weight of new evidence. The social terrain reacts with a mix of curiosity and shame. Those who once dismissed your cautions fumble for context, some shy away, repelled by the discomfort of being wrong, while others approach you with a tentative humility that looks like an apology. That apology is rarely neat. It arrives as fragmented sentences, as reluctant corrections in conversations already in motion. You listen because each awkward admission is a new tile in the mosaic you never meant to assemble. You are tempted to craft a speech, to pronounce a final account that would settle accounts. Resist that urge. Authority procured through triumph tastes thin when it is used to wound. Instead, consider how you want to be known when the noise subsides. Reputation can be an inheritance or a burden. You can choose to accept forms of power that settle into generosity, or you can hoard satisfaction until it curdles into bitterness. There are practical choices to navigate. Requests for counsel will arrive with different intentions. Some seek insight to protect themselves, others seek to exploit a talent they once ostracized. Your discernment must lengthen to include motives as well as facts. Saying yes to every call will dilute purpose. Saying no too often will leave you distant from the very networks where your presence now matters most. At times you will feel a physical ache as history reclaims its shape. The ache is not a wound meant to punish but a reminder that transformation carries cost. You grieve the lost seasons when your voice could be soft without consequence. That grief is honest and necessary. Allow it its space. Grief clears the room for something more sustainable to enter. Amid the split you discover a new metric for courage. It is not the dramatic bravado of confrontation. It is the slow accrual of small choices that favor truth over ease. Courage in this register means sitting with the consequences of being right and maintaining the compassion to offer guidance rather than judgment. It means teaching others how to notice instead of simply pointing at errors. The fracture will realign relationships in unpredictable ways. Some partnerships will deepen as people who once doubted begin to value your steadiness. Others will wither, unable to adjust. Both outcomes are part of the contour of your next chapter. The work now is not simply to tally who was right and who was wrong but to curate the company you will keep as the landscape shifts. Finally, hold the awareness that this period is both a gift and test. The validation you receive can be a mirror of your competence or a mirror of a community learning to see. Let it be primarily a tool for building practices that prevent the mistakes you anticipated. When recognition arrives, arrange it so that it multiplies the capacity of many rather than consolidates advantage into a single hand. Stand steady as the architecture shifts. Treat this phase as an apprenticeship in wisdom where influence is responsibility and possibility grows. Convergence arrives with a sound like city glass settling into a colder sky. You feel it as a pressure moving through avenues and meeting rooms, a slow architecture of consequence aligning with the instincts you once hid. Where your attention rests, the air rearranges itself, and ordinary choices begin to show the geometry you have been sketching in private. Outside the rooms where decisions are made, small rituals change. Leaders pause to ask precise questions. Teams that once relied on charm now demand proof. The environment shifts not from spectacle but from a tightening of tolerances. Your interventions become instruments calibrated for repair rather than retribution, and you learn to modulate force with care. A spiral shapes this work, sometimes a staircase lit by cataloged doubts, sometimes a current of small decisions that redirect reputations and resources. Its form decides whether energy becomes protection or collapses. You practice a new restraint. You say less and observe more. You offer an adjustment rather than a verdict. When you act with exactness, the correction touches only what needs mending. When you act from vanity, the correction becomes a crash that harms fragile structures and undermines future trust. Mastery in this stage is measured by how many fractures are healed without breaking what remains whole. Use care. A practical stewardship begins to take shape. You assemble an architecture of accountability, people who treat evidence with gravity and humility. This network is not about applause. It is about building processes that reduce harm before harm becomes inevitable. Leadership shifts from spectacle to disciplined guardianship. Symbols appear in public spaces. A mirror in a communal hall becomes a token when it exposes unnoticed patterns. A small correction published by a formerly confident voice turns into an artifact that people pass along and say quietly, "Remember when?" Those artifacts matter less for their symbolic heft than for the habit they nurture, a habit of revising in public rather than clinging to comfortable mythology. Temptations arrive as amplification. Platforms that promise scale often demand simplification and sensational framing. You must choose contexts where clarity produces safety rather than attention. Notoriety offers reach but also flattens nuance. You reserve your voice for settings where outcomes improve real lives and where methods can be taught and replicated. Conflict migrates to subtler channels. Influence becomes a form of capital and political economies resist exacting methods. Institutional inertia appears in bureaucratic forms and in the polite evasions of seasoned operators. The strategy that succeeds here is accumulation of small wins. Patient evidence is a language those environments understand because it disrupts less while changing more. You also keep a private margin for solitude. That margin cools observation and prevents your perspective from being performance. Solitude sharpens judgment and conserves your ability to refuse offers that would co-opt your work. In that settled place you continue to document patterns, refine methods, and prepare teachings that can be institutionalized. As the spiral turns, systems begin to accept your calibrations as normal practice. Committees consult you not for theatrics but for verifiable improvement. Relationships shift toward reciprocity. The people around you learn to ask better questions and to design processes that honor uncertainty. The social fabric in your sphere becomes less brittle. This phase demands an ethics you invent as you go. You codify rituals of verification that are repeatable and humble. You insist on transparency in decision processes that once depended on charm. When outcomes improve and crises become fewer, new generations will forget how uncomfortable the change was. Preserve records and teach methods so that reform outlives mere memory. At the center of convergence, a question opens about authorship. Who will benefit when harms are averted and patterns are anticipated? Your choices will determine whether advantage consolidates or resilience spreads. Allowing equitable distribution of protective knowledge becomes a test of whether this moment is about correction or about consolidation. You have moved from margin to mechanism, from solitary witness into a node of governance. Hold that place lightly. Operate with discipline and generosity. The architecture you help build will outlast your presence if it is oriented toward distributed competence rather than centralized acclaim. The next movement will ask for integration rather than patching. Reconciliation will depend on practices that translate insight into durable institutions. Prepare to translate stewardship into systems that teach others to see. The final stage will not be a spectacle. It will be the quiet work of embedding awareness into structures so that future people inherit a world less likely to repeat past mistakes. You arrive at the final turn with a map developed during long nights. The city breathes differently now. Ordinary spaces fold into new roles. Where conversations once skimmed the surface, they now include pauses that invite scrutiny. Your insight is not a trophy. It is a tool for repair. Small validations stack like proof stones in a stream. Each one nudged decisions away from spectacle and toward sound judgment. You learn to regard being right as responsibility rather than as vindication. Correctness without care is brittle. Opportunities to translate insight into practice appear. Some are modest and train committees to spot patterns. Others are larger and involve processes that protect communities. Choose work that strengthens systems. Prefer initiatives that are reproducible to gestures that gratify. Temptations to perform arrive with flattering invitations. Platforms promise reach at the cost of nuance. Decline contexts that demand simplification of complexity. Shallow exposure expands profile but shrinks what you can teach. Depth needs room to breathe. New loneliness arrives as networks adjust. That solitude is not a judgment. It is the terrain where clarity grows. Cultivate a small circle of rigorous confidants who test methods and keep ambition honest. Those companions will help translate private competence into public practice. Apologies will come as halting sentences and small acknowledgments. Receive them without theatrics. Encourage public correction when it repairs harm, and favor processes that make revision ordinary. When groups learn to correct without drama, they build cultures that favor learning. Document practice as you document outcomes. Leave clear notes so others can replicate protective methods. Write simple protocols that reduce the need for personality-driven decisions. Structures that embed careful noticing will be the real legacy of this season. Practice a discipline of restraint. Offer guidance when it reduces risk. Stay silent when instruction would be performative. Authority that rests on demonstration rather than on proclamation becomes a stabilizing force. Aim for presence that prevents harm more than it seeks credit. Teach how to read early signals. Create small training sessions that turn intuition into method. When more people learn to notice, the burden of foresight does not fall on one person. Distributed capacity protects more lives and prevents recurring mistakes. Maintain tenderness toward those who misread you. Shame can close the very channels that rebuild trust. Encourage accountability that admits error and charts a way forward. Compassion and correction fosters durable relationships and restores shared responsibility. As you shape institutions, insist on transparent incentives. Reward evidence and penalize reckless rhetoric. Design review intervals that require revision and make humility operational. The architecture of governance must honor curiosity and not merely reward confidence. Influence will attract offers to scale. Vet each opportunity by asking whether the work preserves nuance and whether it supports repeatable improvement. If a venue insists on spectacle, pass. If it allows you to teach methods, deeply accept and codify. Some moments will feel like completion and others will reveal new thresholds. Treat success as a step, not a summit. The most meaningful change is iterative. Keep records of both decisions and outcomes so future learners can trace how patterns resolved. Invite former doubters to join your practice, offering clear templates and steady mentorship that turns past shame into shared competence, building protections that outlast individual offices and endure across generations. In the center of the screen, a video waits with concrete demonstrations and a sequence of practices that continue this work. That piece shows methods in motion. It is not a replacement for reflection. It is a place to watch technique and rehearse habits. Watch that film as if you were entering a training room. The visuals guide gestures and the pacing shows how to structure inquiry. If the material helps you commit to method and humility, consider subscribing so future tutorials arrive when new lessons can be applied. Enable notifications to link you to a continuing curriculum rather than to announcements. This choice connects you to a learning path that deepens over time. It places you among people who prefer to learn rather than to be impressed. When you press play, you enter the next phase. The sequence there unpacks actionable steps, offers templates that can be copied and adapted, and models the temperament needed to steward difficult truths. Proceed when ready and bring others who will practice with you. Remember this. The core gift you offered was not prediction. It was the capacity to preserve possibility. Let your influence be measured by how many people avoid preventable harm because your methods exist. Heal with patience and instruct with clarity.